I wrote a book about Omar Khadr, but it's not actually about Khadr himself. It's about how all the establishment in Canada, the political establishment, the legal establishment, have come to his defense and have turned him into a folk hero. Joining me now to help figure out why is David Harris, the director of the intelligence program at Insignis Research in Ottawa. Hey, David, welcome back to the show.
Thanks a lot, Ezra.
Now, we've talked about this pathology before, and in fact, the boss of CSIS has remarked on it, how there's something wrong with our political media culture that tries to turn murderers and terrorists into saints and folk heroes. They're doing it again with Omar Khadr. Why, David?
Well, I think there seems to be a kind of perfectionistic approach to the concept of the rule of law. Everything has to be done perfectly, and there seems to be no allowance for human error, for some need for flexibility.
I don't think that's even it, though, David, because it's not that we were imperfect in handling Omar Khadr. I mean, it's that Amnesty International and the Bar Association, they focus so much on Omar Khadr and Meher Arar, the Islamic terrorists, but they ignore other cases, too, like Hussein Salil in China. It's not even the imperfections. They want to turn him into a hero. They're not saying he's a terrorist who had this legal thing done to him wrong. They actually, I mean, Judy Rebick called him a hero on the order of Nelson Mandela. There's something bigger than just details, David.
Well, that's right. I mean, I don't know the specifics of Rebick's claim. If so, it's bizarre. But the simple fact is that there seems to be some kind of cultural shift that we've seen in some of the human rights organizations or self-styled human rights organizations. And it leads to a lot of confusion, moral and legal and otherwise, that's really unhelpful to the cause. Frequently what you see, it appears to me at least, is people who do not take these kinds of issues in the proper context. The fact that we've had an international war declared upon us, upon those of us in the liberal pluralist West, and that in some respects we're fighting for our lives. It appears when you read some of the material that emerges from groups like Amnesty International at times and some of the legal representatives of a high-profile nature that they don't see that there is this kind of threat, and in failing to see that, feel that we are at great luxury to extend all kinds of accommodations and considerations that historically we wouldn't have gone near doing, and perhaps historically we wouldn't have survived doing in the face of the kinds of conflicts we have emerged from in the past.
Now, 20, 30 years ago, Amnesty International actually took on totalitarian dictatorships. I think you might have even been a member back then. I know Jason Kenney was, for example, and a lot of other people who would call themselves conservatives. Back then, Amnesty International stood up for liberals and Democrats and political dissidents against the people with guns. But now it's upside down. They're sticking up with the people with guns and bombs, like Omar Khadr, against the liberal democracies like Canada and the United States. Even left-wingers like Salman Rushdie and the late Christopher Hitchens have condemned Amnesty International, saying it's lost its moral bearings. I just find it so bizarre that, I mean, you're talking about legal perfectionism and, you know, the luxury of being in the West. Fine, fine, fine. But there are still tyrannies out there like Iran and China and even Russia. And Amnesty International has made their number one focus the United States. Have they actually flipped over to the side of darkness, to the side of fascists, to the side of illiberals?
Well, I think one of the first things we have to do is distinguish the average member of Amnesty International and similar organizations from some, at least, of the management here in Canada and abroad. Because I think it's at the management level that we run into difficulties, alliance building and so on, with questionable organizations that might be troubling. I don't know that the average member of the organizations, those who contribute money and so on, fully appreciate what's going on. And your point about some of these affinities and affiliations that have been made is quite correct, even to the extent that it may not be fully appreciated by some of the management quarters. I'll give you an example. I was on a few years ago a CFRA radio in Ottawa discussing this kind of thing, and there was a senior lawyer who was responsible as an employee of Amnesty International. And at some point, I just referred to the fact that somebody had alleged that more column inches had been spilled in a then recent Amnesty International human rights report on the United States than on China. A country, as we well know, that several times in population has nothing constitutionally comparable to what the United States offers and so on. This lawyer said to me that, unfortunately, I was mistaken. I have no doubt about his good faith. I then had a study done. We looked it up, and indeed, for more than one of the preceding years, this is exactly what had happened. I think that it was probably impossible, even for the senior representative of Amnesty International Canada, fully to digest the enormity of what was being suggested and what emerged as a fact.
You know, it's like Greenpeace. They used to be legitimate environmentalists. Now they're just political fundraisers. David Harris, don't go away. I want to talk to you more after the break about how this so-called nonpartisan NGO has become very partisan indeed. That's next on The Source. Amnesty International calls itself a nonpartisan NGO. I'd have to check, but I think they might even be a registered charity. But Alex Neve, their Canadian boss, had no problem giving a partisan endorsement to a new Democrat running for office. Here's a screenshot of the website, if we shouldn't show it now. This is the website of Craig Scott, who's running for the NDP. And this is written by the boss of Amnesty International Canada. I have known him as a valued colleague for years. He's inspired, and on and on and on. Now, this has since been taken off the website of the NDP because maybe it would throw Alex Neve's nonpartisanship into disrepute. Well, we got a picture of it before it was taken down. David Harris, who's still on the line from Ottawa. I mean, isn't the whole point of being an NGO, non-government organization, is that you're not partisan? Is that you talk to friends on the left and the right and any party? Because you're just trying to get people concerned about human rights and you're not trying to get this candidate to beat another candidate?
Well, one would have thought that, especially if there are charitable tax status considerations that, in effect, see the Canadian public paying for some of Amnesty International's operations and activities. That would seem to be fundamental to the mandate and remit of Amnesty International in this country. However, it is part of a £200 million, I think, when I last saw it, international organization, some might say industry. And I guess things get confused. Perhaps there is a culture, to use terms sometimes used in Amnesty International reports, of immunity and impunity.
Huh. Well, now, there's an even more troubling affiliation. I mean, being affiliated with a political party like the NDP, I'm not going to call it disreputable. I'm just going to say it's partisan. But there are some groups like CARECAN, the Council of American Islamic Relations Canada, and their U.S. group, CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations, an unindicted co-conspirator in terrorist charges down there. Tell me about Amnesty International's relationship with CARECAN or CARE.
Well, it does appear over recent years as though Amnesty International's Canadian organization has been quite highly involved with the Canadian Council on American Islamic Relations, CARECAN as it's called. And this has even led one or two officials of Amnesty International to talk about partnering, so a partnership with CARECAN. As you mentioned, CARECAN is the Canadian branch of a Saudi-funded, Washington, D.C. based organization called the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE. And CARE in the United States has seen several of its significant officers and affiliates imprisoned on terror-related charges.
They've actually been imprisoned?
Yes, a number of them. And that organization in the United States, the mother organization of the Canadian one, has been designated by the United States Justice Department an unindicted co-conspirator in the course of the immensely successful Holy Land Foundation prosecution.
Huh.
So this is quite a picture overall. It was said by David Frum in 2006 that perhaps 70% of CARECAN's revenues were sent to the United States mother organization. So putting it together, it's a tricky sort of picture. I would note that no Canadian officials, as far as I know, have been charged with any kind of crime or convicted with any kind of terror offense. The organization was set up by Dr. Shima Khan, incidentally, who is a monthly Globe and Mail columnist.
Sure.
And this has been quite an interesting sort of development all around.
Yeah. Well, now, we're going to invite Alex Neve of Amnesty to come on the show. We've invited him in the past. He always refuses. I would like to get him on to explain this. But here is a comment of an Amnesty International spokesman who's actually on another TV show with you. Let's roll her statement that no. They've got nothing to do with the bad guys in the States. Here's the clip from Amnesty.
And we do work with Care Canada in Canada. We have no relationship with the organization in the United States.
May I just...
Does that answer the question?
That's simply what I can say. I mean, we do carefully screen
You mean
who we
other
work
things
with.
you can't say, or?
Well, I mean, that's just the fact. We have no relationship with the people in the U.S. who he's referring to. My only relationship is with a couple of colleagues of Care Canada.
We're totally in Canada.
Yeah.
Well, may I make a...
We do.
Okay.
We do carefully look at who we partner up with, and we would never partner with someone who condones attacks on civilians. I'd like to make that extremely clear.
Is she telling the truth, David?
Well, I was convinced that she was sincere, but I don't think she was perhaps up to date on some of the background. The simple fact is that Amnesty International does appear to have partnered in some form. You can actually find an endorsement of Mr. Neve for Amnesty International on at least one CareCan annual review. And when it comes to the relationship between the Canadian organization and the American one, this is now beyond doubt. We have seen the founding chair, Dr. Shima Khan, swore under oath in the course of trademark proceedings before the Superior Court of Ontario that the Canadian organization CareCan takes its direction and control from the U.S. organization. So there can be no further debate about this, and I don't know why Amnesty International was so profoundly unaware of the situation.
David, we've got to stop it there. Just while you were talking, we rolled that commentary by Alex Neve of Amnesty International praising CareCan, the Canadian affiliate of that U.S. group. Troubling things. Amnesty International, their credibility in a downward tailspin. Thanks for joining us here today. Hey.